At the September 10th Wilson City Power Plant meeting, B.E.C went out of their way to assure Abaco that they had nothing to worry about. With only one brief exception, all facts given by the presenters were from reports paid for and commissioned by B.E.C or from other Bahamian governmental agencies. They are heavily biased.
This is the EIA report that was done and produced and completed in October of last year.
As I've indicated, we're under active review.
Yet construction forges ahead.
With the environmental systems in place, there'd be no significant marine impacts, no significant loss of endangered species. There'd be minimal impacts to wetlands or mangroves. There'd be no adverse soil or groundwater impacts.
This EIA is, at best, incomplete. There is a complete EIA available free to the public online from a reputable source. Although it is about East Timor, most of its conclusions are relevant. Please take a moment to read it.
The Snake Key site was determined to be non-viable based on some environmental sensibilities.
Snake Key, together with other nearby keys, constitute a primarily sensitive environment, forming a protective barrier for the mangroves along the eastern coast of Great Abaco Island and serves as a natural fishery nursery.
Everything about Snake Key applies to Wilson City. In fact, it is even more important to biodiversity and our fishing industries. Here's the real reason.
You will be aware and of approval in principle granted for a resort at Snake Key.
Nothing to do with the environment or any EIA that was not completed in time.
The HFO fuel that will be used will result in less than 2% sulfur emissions, which is well below the World Health Organization's accepted standards.
The sulfur content of fuel is converted by the power plant to sulfur dioxide. This is actually what is emitted, not sulfur. Emissions are measured in micrograms per volume, not percentages, and there is a huge difference. These measurements are averaged and reported based on a time period. A simple percentage of sulfur emitted means absolutely nothing. Perhaps Mr. Gottlieb means that 2% sulfur in the fuel meets the WHO's emission standards. This would be completely untrue, as the WHO's emission standards are for, well, emissions. Simply knowing the content of the fuel source does not allow you to know the emission content.
The height of the stack itself means that when emissions are released into the atmosphere, it will be dispersed at distances based on the prevailing wind.
This is called dilution. Here is what the United States Environmental Protection Agency has to say. Atmospheric dilution is not an acceptable response to air pollution control. Locally and regionally, it has little or no effect. Our approach is to reduce emissions rather than manipulate stack design.
And the wind blows from the northeast, so any release of material into the air will actually be blown to the southeast away from the site.
This is only true for about 31 days of the year. Most of the time, the toxic emissions, particulates, and acid rain will be traveling over farmland, Spring City, and Marsh Harbor. About 60 days a year, it will be traveling over Hopetown, Man o' War, and Lovers Quarters. It will affect the cisterns on those keys. It should be pointed out here that the highest sulfur content of diesel is 10,000 parts per million. In other words, 0.01%. At 2%, the sulfur content of the HFO is 40 times that of the worst diesel, and most diesel is much, much lower. This sulfur content is what is converted into sulfur dioxide. But the HFO plant at Wilson City will not just be spewing out sulfur dioxide. There will be oxides of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and large particulate matter, which looks like soot. Some of these particles are known to cause cancer and respiratory problems in humans.
The claims that emissions from the plant will result in acid rain, which will poison collected rainwater, are false. Acid rain is a result of sulfur combining with moisture, water in the air to form sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is the component in acid rain. But because of the exceptionally and very basically negligible amounts of sulfur that are going to be emitted from this plant, there's very little likelihood of any acid rain being produced.
Again, Mr. Gottlieb is right that sulfur will not be emitted from the plant. Acid rain is caused by sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and oxides of nitrogen, all of which will be emitted from the plant.
And B.E.C is to install air monitoring stations to measure baseline and after startup air quality.
Like the monitoring in Nassau? When inquiring with B.E.C, the most recent report they had was from October of 2005. And the report shows that the data capture was not 100% due to maintenance issues. The dominant wind direction in Nassau for October is east-northeast. There are no monitors in the ocean where most of the emissions go.
Even in looking at the reports we have now, we know that we have to do some further modeling so we have a better estimate as to where that material will actually go.
They said it, yet work continues.
Bunker C is so toxic that gloves must be worn to avoid contact with the skin. That is a false statement.
Not according to the material safety data sheets from the oil companies.
Diesel, on the other hand, is far more toxic.
According to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, there is sufficient evidence for the carcinogenic effects of HFO on animals. There is limited evidence for the same effects from diesel. The material safety data sheets from oil companies also reflect the high toxicity of HFO. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration says long-term skin exposure to compounds has caused skin cancer in laboratory animals and humans.
The United States, Canada, Germany, Belgium, and other European countries have HFO plants.
But they are not building any new ones. The MAN Group representative never talked about new HFO plants in the US, Canada, or their own home, Germany. In fact, most states, provinces, and EU countries are converting and decommissioning their HFO plants. Citizens in Massachusetts are currently fighting to close 2 HFO plants for health reasons. Costa Rica is sticking to diesel. Thailand is converting 1 to biodiesel. 3 each are converting to gas in Brazil, Turkey, and Portugal. 4 in Pakistan. 16 in Indonesia. Even huge polluter China is closing 40. In 2005, our small island nation was one of the top worldwide importers of heavy fuel oil. We burn more HFO than Jamaica or Cuba. In fact, the Bahamas was the highest per capita importer out of all the independent nations in the world.
Florida Power and Light operates HFO Bunker C fuel plants at Riviera Beach.
What he didn't say is that plant is only used in emergencies and for short periods.
Now, they are planning to change over to gas, but that's primarily for economic reasons, not environmental reasons.
On their website, Florida Power and Light actually list extensive economic and environmental reasons. This also directly contradicts B.E.C's claim that HFOs are the most economical route. When used on land, National Mariner says, because of all the complications of heavy fuel, a large portion of the savings from the lower cost of HFO, perhaps a third or more, will be soaked up by construction and operating costs. There are also hidden costs not accounted for, primarily on fisheries, human health, and Abaco's tourism image as a low pollution and natural destination. In a 2000 report entitled Fuel for Thought, the World Bank called HFO a dirty fuel. In the long term, the cost of oil, even the cheapest and dirtiest that B.E.C is insisting on using, will only go up. There were other issues that B.E.C did not address. Where is the waste oil to be stored and for how long? Why the sudden doubling of our current capacity? They claim our power needs are growing at 5% a year, although that doesn't take into account the current economic downturn. Even at 5% growth, it will take almost 15 years to double our needs. Surely by then we should have a cleaner energy source. What is a response plan when a disaster occurs? What happens when an oil tanker enters North Bar Channel in a rage and ends up on Sandy Key Reef? That will destroy a national park and tourist attraction, heavily impact one of the most important marine nurseries in the northern Bahamas, pollute the community and tourist attraction of Little Harbor, and affect a brand new development trying to go into vineyards. What about fixing the delivery system of wires, transformers, and transfer stations? It won't matter how many megawatts they are promising if they can't deliver it consistently all over Abaco. What about the money? Where is it coming from? B.E.C came and presented for over 2 hours. Yet they didn't answer some fundamental questions, and much of the data they presented was inaccurate, outdated, and misleading. There are alternatives to this plant.